challenging and repeated question I get from people is whether we could generalize the results from college undergrad to real people. So first of all, college undergrad like to think of themselves as real people, and I also think of themselves as real people. But I think the question is nevertheless useful, right? We have younger people who are maybe don't have a lot going on in their life. They haven't had much experience. I mean, there's all kinds of differences you might think about, so it makes sense to ask whether we could generalize. And like many other things, I think it's an empirical question. You can think about reasons why we should be able to generalize. After all, these are just people. How different are people? You can also think about reasons why we might not be able to generalize. So far, whenever we can, I think of it as a progression over time. You start with college students, which are just basically easier to experiment with, you start with and figure out ideas, and then if you can, you move to older people with different level of experiences, with a higher heterogeneity of education, and so on. So far, I have to say that every time we've done it, the differences were not that big. It's not that there are absolutely no differences, but the differences have not been very big. Now, we haven't done it in everything, and it's clearly very important, so it's a mission that we're going to continue with. But right now, the way it seems like is that this is not going to be a big factor explaining where things are different. Now, there is one important aspect to think about. Whenever we do experiments, we have multiple conditions. So we say, for example, would people react differently when they're aroused to when they're not? And we find that the people who are aroused behave differently than when they're not. And college students and non-college students basically behave the same way. Now, non-college students might be overall more inclined to a kind of behavior or less inclined to a different kind of behavior. So that's a different story whether the effect of the emotion or the manipulation work on them. So you can imagine that college students have lots of hormones, have a bigger effect of arousal, and people who are my age have a lower effect of arousal, but nevertheless it will be affecting the same direction and the same type. So when we say that the conclusion hold, it doesn't necessarily mean that we expect that the parameters from each experiment will be the same in other populations. What we're saying is that we think that the general pattern where this effect will have this kind of relationship on this behavior, that this force will shift things in this direction, that at that level of specificity, we think it will keep on holding.